The chandeliers in Lowell and Associates shimmered like frozen rain. My mother's pearls caught the same light, sharp and cold. My father sat rigid beside her, his cufflinks gleaming with the Hartman crest. Nathan, my brother, scrolled through his phone, whispering stock prices like the whole thing bored him. And me, I was clutching a worn leather purse and pretending my palms weren't sweating. When Mr. Lowell cleared his throat, the room fell silent. To Richard Hartman he read, "I bequeath my controlling shares of Hartman and Sons Shipping." My father's smile appeared measured, satisfied. To Eleanor Hartman, the family estate in Cape Elizabeth and all its adjoining assets, Mother dabbed her lips with a linen napkin like she was accepting an award. To Nathan Hartman, the New York penthouse and all vehicles within. Nathan smirked, leaning back like the words had been written by him. Then came the pause, long deliberate like the moment before a sentence in court. And to Isabel Hartman, the lawyer said softly, "This envelope." The laughter that followed was quiet, but it burned. My mother leaned toward me, her perfume like a warning. "You don't need to know the reason," she whispered. But then the lawyer slipped me a second envelope beneath the table and whispered, "Run before it's too late." When I looked up, he was already turning the page, pretending nothing had happened. My pulse pounded in my ears. Around the room, the others were smiling, their victory complete. Nathan stretched, loosening his tie. "Guess you got the short end, sis," he said, chuckling. I forced a small smile, my fingers tightening on the paper. "Seems like it." The sound of chairs scraping filled the marble floor as the family rose. Mother kissed Mr. Lowell on the cheek, her red nails glinting like blades. "Always such a pleasure, James. Thank you for making it painless." "Of course," he murmured, but when his eyes flicked to mine, they were filled with something else, guilt. Outside rain pressed against the tall windows, streaking the city in silver. I could see our reflection in the glass, their elegant silhouettes, my small figure at the end of the table barely visible. I waited until the room emptied. The echo of their laughter lingered long after the elevator doors closed. When I finally stood, my legs trembled. The first envelope was light, almost empty. The seal broke with a sound too soft for what it meant. Inside was a single folded sheet of cream stationery, 2 words written in my grandfather's familiar handwriting, "Trust the silence." My chest tightened. No money, no house, no car, just words. I left the building under the same rain that had watched our family dinners, our lies, our rehearsed affection. My father's driver offered me a ride. I shook my head and walked, heels splashing through puddles. The city smelled of wet iron and betrayal. By the time I reached my car, my phone was vibrating with messages. "Nathan, don't be too dramatic. Mom, dinner Sunday. Don't make it awkward." I turned the phone off. At home, the apartment felt smaller than usual. The radiator hissed like an old man's sigh. I set the 2 envelopes on the table beside the coffee cup rings and unpaid bills. One was clean and official, the other heavier, sealed with wax. Mr. Lowell's warning replayed in my mind. "Run before it's too late." I sat down, staring at the wax seal. The color reminded me of the chess set my grandfather gave me when I was 12, the one missing a pawn. He used to say queens don't ask for permission to move Bella. They just do. The night he died, I'd been the only one who sat by his bed holding his hand while everyone else made phone calls about property taxes and trust funds. Now, months later, I was the only one who had nothing. Or maybe I thought the only one who had something that couldn't be divided. I broke the second seal with a shaking hand. Inside was a single envelope-sized ticket. Zurich, Switzerland. Departure 4 days. My name was printed clearly on it, Miss Isabel Hartman. A letter beneath it read, "You are to present yourself to Dr. Emile Renaud Rosenfeld Foundation, Geneva. Verification of inheritance. Bring this document and proof of identity." At the bottom, written in that same careful script, "Your grandfather trusted the silence. Now so must you." The air left my lungs. Geneva. A foundation I'd never heard of. And a meeting set by a man who'd been dead 6 months. The phone rang again. I let it. The apartment seemed to hum with the rain outside, a steady rhythm that matched my heartbeat. Was it real, or another cruel twist? I opened my laptop and typed Rosenfeld Foundation Geneva. The search results glowed back at me: private banking, confidential wealth management, international holdings. The kind of institutions my family courted donations from, not belong to. Every image screamed money, old, powerful, discreet. A shiver ran down my spine. Maybe my grandfather hadn't left me nothing. Maybe he'd left me a secret. When the rain turned heavier, I walked to the window. Across the street, a couple hurried under an umbrella, laughing. The warmth between them felt like another language. I pressed my forehead to the glass. The city lights blurred into color. My reflection stared back, pale, small, uncertain. But behind my eyes, something had shifted. Maybe it was the humiliation finally hardening into resolve. Maybe it was the memory of his voice. The queen moves when the board is silent. I turned from the window, went to the drawer beside my bed, and pulled out the old chessboard. The pawn was still missing the squares worn by time. I set it on the table, placed the queen in the center, and whispered, "Checkmate's not always about winning fast, is it, Grandpa?" I folded the letter, carefully tucked it into my passport, and stared at the clock. 4 days. 4 days to decide whether I was chasing a ghost or an inheritance hidden behind silence. 4 days to choose between humiliation and the truth. The rain outside eased into mist, and the city dimmed under its weight. I sat there, the queen alone on the board, the ticket gleaming under the lamp. And for the first time, I knew what it felt like to stop being quiet. The morning after the will reading felt unreal, like I had woken into a world that didn't want me in it. My family's laughter still echoed in my head, the sharp edges of their amusement slicing through every attempt I made to calm down. The envelope sat on my kitchen table, pale against the dark wood, sealed and quiet like it was watching me. I had barely slept. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw my mother's smile, that perfect, practiced expression of control, and Victor's smirk as he pocketed the keys to a new life. I stood by the window of my small apartment, the Seattle sky heavy with rain. The city below moved on like nothing had happened. Cars, people, umbrellas, everyone had a direction but me. I picked up the envelope again, running my fingers over the wax seal until it cracked. Inside was the letter, the plane ticket, and that line written in my grandfather's familiar hand. "Trust the game." For a moment, I wanted to laugh. What kind of game started with humiliation and ended with a plane ticket to Switzerland? But the more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't random. My grandfather never did random. Every move he made had meaning. When I was little, he used to say, "A good player knows how to lose quietly and win without noise." Maybe this was one of those silent victories he used to talk about. I spent most of that day pacing between the kitchen and the living room, reading and rereading the letter. The words began to blur, but my pulse refused to slow down. I looked up Rosenberg Trust on my laptop, my fingers trembling as I typed. The search results filled the screen: private banking, inheritance management, offshore holdings, names that belonged to people far wealthier than anyone I'd ever known. Every article screamed money and power. What was my grandfather doing connected to them? My phone buzzed. My mother's name appeared on the screen. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times before answering. "Sweetheart," she said, her voice syrupy, careful. "How are you feeling today?" "I'm fine," I lied. "Good. Don't take yesterday too hard. Your grandfather was sentimental. Maybe he thought you'd appreciate a symbolic gesture. A ticket to another continent." She chuckled softly. "A change of scenery could do you good. You've been working too hard for too little. Maybe you'll find a nice retreat out there, or at least some peace of mind." Behind her words, I could hear Victor's laughter again, the clinking of glasses. They were celebrating. "Did you ever hear him mention Switzerland?" I asked. "No, darling. Why would he? He barely left Washington. Anyway, don't let this get to you. Some things aren't meant for everyone." Meaning, what exactly? But she didn't answer. just a light sigh, the kind she used when ending a conversation she no longer wanted to have. "I have to go," she said. "Dinner guests." "Of course," she hung up. I stared at my reflection in the window for a long time after that. The woman staring back looked tired, older somehow, her eyes dim from years of trying to be what everyone else needed. For as long as I could remember, I'd been the quiet one, the helper, the listener, the afterthought. I'd held this family together through their chaos, their mistakes, their scandals, and now they had erased me without hesitation. But that envelope, this strange, infuriating envelope, was still here, and it was mine. That night I dreamed of my grandfather's chessboard. The pieces were scattered across a table under the porch light, just like when I was a child. He sat across from me, his wrinkled hands moving the queen forward. "Don't rush your next move, Clara," he said in that calm, patient voice I'd almost forgotten. "The board is never as empty as it seems." When I woke, my heart was pounding. The rain was still falling soft and steady, like the world hadn't changed, but something inside me had. By the second day, I stopped fighting the pull. I began to gather information about the Rosenberg Trust, about Switzerland, about anything that could make sense of what he'd left behind. Each new fact drew me deeper in. The trust wasn't just a bank. It was a private consortium that handled generational wealth transfers, confidential holdings, and most intriguingly, inheritances with restricted disclosure. Some estates required personal verification by the heir. Others could only be activated if the heir appeared in person. I read that line 3 times. In person. That's when the decision began to take shape. In the evening, I drove out to the storage unit where I kept the last of my grandfather's belongings. Old furniture, photographs, the chessboard he'd given me when I turned 12. The box smelled faintly of cedar and dust. I lifted the lid and stared at the worn wooden pieces. One pawn was missing, just like I remembered. He'd told me once that he left it that way on purpose to remind me that sometimes you play short-handed and still win. I brushed my thumb across the queen, feeling the small nick at its base, the one he'd made accidentally with his pocket knife. My throat tightened. "What are you trying to tell me, Grandpa?" I whispered. When I got home, I booked the flight. Zurich. Friday morning. First class, the ticket said so clear as daylight. I hesitated only once before confirming. The next day I called my boss at the elementary school. "I need personal leave," I said. Her voice was full of concern. You never take days off. Is everything all right, I think?" "I just need to find out something," I replied. "Something that's been waiting a long time." She paused. Then, "Go. We'll cover for you." When I hung up, I realized how strange it felt to have someone simply say yes. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed, suitcase open beside me. I packed with deliberate calm black coat, 2 dresses, 1 pair of heels, my old notebook, and the envelope. I slid the ticket into my passport, then zipped everything shut. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the heater. I poured myself a glass of wine and stood by the window again. Across the street, the neon sign of the diner flickered. I'd eaten there 100 times with my grandfather. He'd always order black coffee, 2 sugars. Trust the game. Maybe this was his game, the last one he'd ever play, and somehow he wanted me to move the next piece. The night before my flight, my mother called again. I almost didn't answer, but something in me wanted to hear her voice, to see if there was even a trace of guilt in it. "I heard you're leaving," she said without preamble. "I am. To chase a dead man's secret, to find the truth." She gave a small laugh. "The truth doesn't pay the bills, Clara. Be careful you don't embarrass yourself. I think that stopped mattering yesterday." There was a pause, the kind that stretched like a held breath. "You always were the sentimental one," she said finally. "Don't let it ruin you." I smiled into the silence. "You always were the practical one. Don't let it save you." She hung up without another word. When I turned off the lights, the envelope glowed faintly under the lamp, the wax seal catching the last bit of light. I placed it in my bag and lay down. Sleep came slowly, full of restless dreams, flashes of chessboards, waved snow-capped mountains, and the faint echo of my grandfather's voice saying, Move, Clara, it's your turn. The morning of my flight, the sky was a thin steel gray. I dressed quietly, slipped on my coat, and picked up the suitcase. The street was empty, slick from rain. At the airport, the smell of coffee and jet fuel mixed in the air. I walked through security in a haze, holding the ticket like a secret I didn't want anyone to see. At the gate, the attendant smiled. "Good morning, Miss West. You're in seat 2A, first class." I blinked. "So it's real, very real," she said, handing me my boarding pass. I found my seat near the window. The leather felt soft beneath my fingers, the cabin quiet, unreal. As the plane lifted off, the city fell away beneath the clouds. For the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. I didn't feel small. I felt alive. Somewhere above the storm, between what was lost and what waited ahead, I whispered into the silence, "All right, Grandpa. Let's play." The airport lights blurred into a silver haze as the plane taxied down the runway. I kept my fingers wrapped around the edge of the armrest, pretending not to notice how hard my heart was pounding. The sky outside was a slate gray, the kind that promised both turbulence and revelation. When the engines roared and the city fell away beneath the clouds, I felt the first shiver of freedom and fear. I was 31 years old, and for the first time in my life, I was doing something my family hadn't planned, predicted, or approved. The cabin was quiet. The hum of the engines sounded like distant thunder. A flight attendant offered me champagne, but I shook my head. I wasn't celebrating. I was thinking. Every second of this trip felt like a question I didn't know how to answer. Why Switzerland? Why me? And why had my grandfather written those words? Trust the game, when everything in my family had always been about control. Not trust, I leaned back in my seat, staring out the window. The sun had begun to rise somewhere over the Atlantic, a pale strip of gold cutting through endless gray. I reached into my coat pocket and touched the envelope again. The paper was smooth warm now from being held too long. Beneath it was the chess piece I'd tucked there at the last minute, the wooden queen from the board he gave me when I was 12. It felt strange to have it with me, like carrying a fragment of an unfinished conversation. Across the aisle, a man in a dark coat caught my eye. He was reading a newspaper, the headline bold, "Hartman Maritime Group expands Pacific Holdings." My father's company, my family's empire. The same name that had erased me from its inheritance 2 days ago. The man's expression didn't change as he turned the page, but something about him felt deliberate too, still too aware. When our eyes met again, he smiled politely and looked away. I told myself I was being paranoid, but the feeling didn't leave. After takeoff, I tried to distract myself by opening the small folder that came with the ticket. Inside, along with the itinerary, was a handwritten note on heavy stationery, seat 4A. "You're not alone." The words sent a chill through me. I looked around quickly. My seat was 2A, so 4A was just behind me. I craned my neck slightly, pretending to stretch, but the man with the newspaper was sitting there. He looked perfectly ordinary, gray suit, neat haircut, reading glasses, but my pulse didn't agree. I closed the folder and took a slow breath. This was ridiculous. My grandfather might have been wealthy, eccentric, even secretive, but he wasn't the kind of man to send me into danger. Then again, how well had I ever really known him? The memory came back suddenly, uninvited. Summer in Napa years ago. I was sitting on the porch with him, watching the sun set over the vineyard. He'd just beaten me in another game of chess. I was 12, sulking, accusing him of cheating. He laughed, setting the queen back on the board. "Do you know why the queen is the most powerful piece?" he'd asked. "Because she can move anywhere," I'd said. He smiled. "No, because she doesn't ask for permission." That memory stayed with me now, stronger than ever. Maybe this trip wasn't about money. Maybe it was about proving I could move. Hours passed. Somewhere over Europe, the cabin lights dimmed. Most passengers slept. I couldn't. My thoughts spun like wheels on ice. I kept thinking about my mother's voice on the phone, about how easily she'd dismissed me. Some things aren't meant for everyone. What if she was right? What if I was chasing a mirage? I must have drifted off because the next thing I knew a flight attendant was tapping my shoulder gently. "We'll be landing in about 2 hours, Miss West. Would you like breakfast?" I blinked at her, disoriented. The cabin was quiet, the windows glowing faint blue. The man in 4A was gone, his seat was empty. A folded napkin rested on his tray table. On it, drawn in ballpoint pen, was a single chess piece, the queen. I froze. "Excuse me," I said to the attendant. The man sitting behind me, "Where did he go?" She frowned politely. "There hasn't been anyone in 4A this flight, ma'am." I turned to look again. The seatbelt was neatly folded, untouched. My stomach dropped. No, he was right there. Gray suit glasses, he was reading a paper about Hartman Maritime. Her expression softened the way people do when they think you're overtired. "You might have seen someone boarding before takeoff, but 4A's been empty since we left Boston." I leaned back, my pulse racing. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe exhaustion and emotion had blurred everything. Still, I picked up the napkin and slipped it into my coat pocket. The ink was fresh. When the plane began its descent, I pressed my forehead to the window. Below, the Alps cut through the clouds like white knives. Sunlight hit the snow caps, turning everything silver. Switzerland looked like another planet, too clean, too still, too far from everything I knew. At Zurich International, the air was cold and crisp, smelling faintly of pine and jet fuel. I stepped off the plane and followed the line through customs, clutching my passport. My body was in motion, but my mind was miles behind, still trying to make sense of the note, the napkin, the silence in 4A. Outside the arrivals gate, people held signs with names written in neat black letters. I scanned them automatically until one stopped me. Miss Clara West, Rosenberg Trust. The man holding it was tall, wearing a dark overcoat and gloves. His hair was silver at the temples, his face unreadable. When he saw me approach, he gave a small, respectful nod. "Miss West," he said in lightly accented English. "Welcome to Switzerland." My mouth went dry. "You're with the Trust." "Yes," he said. "Doctor Renault asked me to bring you. He's been expecting you. He's been expecting me for 20 years. The words hit harder than I expected. 20 years, that would have been when I was 11, before my family fell apart, before my grandfather stopped visiting every Christmas. He gestured toward the exit. "Please come with me. The car is waiting." The doors opened to a rush of icy wind. A black sedan idled at the curb, sleek and spotless. As I slid into the back seat, I caught my reflection in the tinted window, pale, uncertain, but with a flicker of something else. Curiosity, maybe. Or courage. The car pulled away from the airport, merging onto a narrow road, lined with fir trees and distant mountains. The driver, whose name I hadn't caught, didn't speak. For once, I didn't want conversation. I just watched the landscape roll by, trying to quiet the noise in my head. "After a while," he said, "Dr. Renault often spoke of you." I turned to him. "You knew him. I've worked for him for 15 years. He admired your grandfather very much." "Then you knew my grandfather too," he smiled faintly. "In a way. His presence still fills the halls of the Rosenberg Foundation." I wanted to ask what that meant, but something in his tone stopped me. I looked back out the window. The mountains were closer now, wrapped in mist. As we drove, I realized I wasn't afraid anymore. The uncertainty was still there, but it had changed shape. It wasn't fear of what I'd find. It was fear of what I might become once I did. The driver slowed as we approached a long stretch of private road. Iron gates stood ahead, carved with an emblem I'd never seen before, a silver chess queen surrounded by vines. I couldn't breathe for a moment. "What is this place?" I whispered. He pressed a button on the dashboard. The gates opened soundlessly. "Rosenberg Estate," he said, "and the beginning of your inheritance." We drove through in silence. Beyond the gates, a stone mansion rose from the snow, its tall windows reflecting the pale light. Smoke curled from a chimney, and somewhere inside I imagined the warmth of firelight waiting. When we stopped, the driver stepped out and opened my door. I hesitated for a second before stepping into the snow. The cold bit through my gloves, but it grounded me. He gestured toward the entrance. Doctor, Renaud will meet you in the study. I climbed the steps slowly. The door opened before I could knock. A man in his 60s stood there, sharp suit, kind eyes. Miss West, he said, his French accent soft but clear. I'm Henri Renaud. I've been waiting a very long time to meet you. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came. He smiled gently. Come in, Clara. You've already made the first move. Inside, the fire crackled in the hearth, casting golden light across the marble floor. For the first time since the will reading, I felt warmth. Real, deliberate warmth. I looked around the room at the chessboard set neatly on a side table, a single piece standing at its center, the queen. It gleamed silver in the firelight, as if it had been waiting all this time for me. The room smelled faintly of cedar and old smoke. A fire crackled softly in the hearth, its light painting gold across the walls. Doctor, Henri Renaud stood near the window, hands clasped behind his back, as if he'd been rehearsing this moment for years. I stood in the doorway, suitcase still in hand, unsure whether to move closer or run. Please, he said, motioning toward the chair across from the desk. You must be tired from your flight. I sat slowly, the warmth of the room seeping into me, thawing the cold I'd carried all the way from Seattle. The chessboard on the table beside him caught my eye. It was made of dark walnut and silver, every piece perfectly in place, except for one, the queen, standing alone in the center. Renaud followed my gaze. He chose that board himself, he said it reminded him of you. I swallowed. You knew my grandfather well as anyone could, he replied. Arthur was meticulous, strategic. He planned decades ahead, always assuming others would not. Even this meeting, Clara, he arranged it 20 years ago. 20 years, he nodded. He left instructions sealed in the trust. We were told to expect you at some point after his passing. We didn't know when, only that he believed you would come. I leaned forward. But why me? My father was his heir. My family had everything, his company, his estate, his everything. Renaud's expression softened. Not everything. The answer hung in the air, gentle but sharp. He walked to his desk and opened a drawer. Inside was a folder bound in red leather embossed with the Rosenberg seal, the same crest I'd seen on the gates. He set it in front of me. This, he said, is what your grandfather truly built, what he left behind. My fingers hovered over the folder. I don't understand. He smiled faintly. Then perhaps you should read. I opened it carefully. Inside were pages of documents, financial statements, trust agreements, property deeds, all written in French and English. The more I flipped, the less sense it made. There were holdings in Geneva, Zurich, Singapore, even Dubai. I recognized some of the companies, shipping real estate technology firms worth hundreds of millions. And at the bottom of every page, stamped in silver ink, was the same name, Rosenberg Foundation subsidiary of Hartmann Maritime Holdings. My throat tightened. He owned these, Renaud nodded. Not directly. Through the foundation. Officially, they were listed under a trust established in 1998, completely separate from the Hartmann family business. The public never knew. I turned another page, my eyes catching on a familiar name, West Maritime North America. 51% controlling interest. That's my father's company, I whispered. Renaud's gaze was steady. Yes, Arthur never sold it. He merely allowed others to believe he had. The words hit me like a wave. My father, who'd built his entire life on the illusion of ownership, had never really owned any of it. He left it all to me, I asked, my voice shaking. Renaud didn't answer immediately. He poured tea instead, setting a delicate china cup in front of me. The gesture was strangely comforting, almost parental. He left it to the person he believed would understand what power should be used for, he said. He left it to the one he trusted. I stared at him, unable to speak. He continued. Arthur was disappointed in how his son handled the company. The greed, the manipulation, it wasn't what he wanted his legacy to be. So he moved everything. Quietly. Safely. Here. I shook my head, trying to piece it together. But why not? Tell me. Why keep it secret? Because you weren't ready, Renaud said simply. He told me, when she has learned to lose with grace, she will know how to win without cruelty. I looked down at my hands. The heat from the teacup seeped through my fingers, grounding me. He really said that? Renaud smiled. He said many things about you. He called you the quiet queen. The words hit something deep inside me, stirring a memory so vivid it made my eyes sting. My grandfather on the porch, summer air thick with the smell of grapes and sun-warmed wood. He'd placed the queen piece in my hand, smiling. You don't need to shout, Clara. The queen moves when the board is silent. The room blurred for a moment. I blinked hard. What happens now? Renaud walked to a small safe behind the desk and entered a code. The lock clicked open. From inside, he retrieved a velvet pouch and placed it gently on the table. When I opened it, a gold key glimmered under the light. This unlocks the Rosenberg archives, he said. Inside are personal letters, recordings, directives, all addressed to you. He wanted you to have them only after you met with me. I ran my thumb over the key. It was warm, heavier than it looked. And if I hadn't come, he gave a small shrug. Then, it would have remained sealed. Forever. For a while, neither of us spoke. The fire popped softly in the hearth, the only sound between us. Finally, I said, my family will find out, won't they, when the transfer becomes public? They will, he said, and they will not take it well. I laughed bitterly. That's an understatement. Renaud's eyes met mine. You have a choice, Miss West. You can walk away now and the trust will remain here untouched. Or you can claim it and everything that comes with it, the power, the truth, and the burden. I thought of my father's face at the will, reading the smug certainty. I thought of my mother's smile, that perfect performance of grace built on deceit. I thought of the letter of my grandfather's handwriting, of the words that had started all of this. Trust the game. I looked up. I'll claim it. Renaud nodded once, as if he had expected nothing less. He reached into the folder and slid one more document across the table, a verification form written in French. Then sign here. Once you do, everything held under Rosenberg Foundation transfers to your authority. I stared at the line for a long moment, pen trembling in my hand. The ink bled smoothly as I wrote my name. When it was done, Renaud took the paper gently and placed it in a sealed envelope. It's official, he said. As of this moment, you control the foundation and every asset within it. The words felt surreal, too big for the quiet room they occupied. I leaned back, exhaling slowly. Renaud studied me. You're calm. I learned from the best, I said softly. He smiled. Then, perhaps you're ready for what comes next. He walked to the window, pulling the curtains aside. Outside, the sky had darkened to indigo. Snow drifted lightly across the courtyard, settling on the stone fountain below. When your grandfather built this place, he said he wanted it to be a sanctuary for truth, Renaud said. He believed truth outlives even the people who fear it. I joined him at the window. The snow reflected the firelight from inside, making the world shimmer. Did he know what my father did to him? Renaud hesitated. He suspected. But he chose patience over war. He said time reveals what anger hides. I swallowed hard. And now time's up. He turned to face me, his expression unreadable. If you're going to confront them, do it not as a wounded daughter, but as the heir of a legacy. Remember what Arthur taught you. I nodded slowly. The queen moves when the board is silent. Exactly. He handed me another envelope, smaller this time, sealed with the same wax crest. This is his final note to you. I suggest you read it when you're alone. When I returned to my room that night, I sat by the window overlooking the frozen lake. The mountains rose black against the silver sky. I broke the seal on the envelope and unfolded the letter. My dearest Clara, it began in his steady hand. You were never the forgotten one. You were the lesson. Trust is the hardest currency to earn, and the only one worth keeping. What was stolen will return to you in silence. Use it not to punish, but to restore. The board is yours now. I read it 3 times. The fire in the grate burned low. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees. I traced his signature with my finger, feeling both smaller and stronger than I'd ever been. He'd built an empire of secrets, and somehow he'd trusted me to carry its truth. As I placed the letter back into its envelope, I caught my reflection in the window. The woman staring back looked older, steadier, certain. The Queen had finally moved. Snow fell in a slow, deliberate rhythm outside my window, each flake catching the light from the lampposts that lined the courtyard below. I hadn't slept. The letter from my grandfather lay open on the nightstand beside me, its inked words replaying in my mind like a quiet voice that refused to fade. Use it not to punish, but to restore. I whispered the line aloud, wondering if I even knew what restoration looked like after so many years of being dismissed, overlooked, erased. Downstairs, the sound of footsteps on marble drew me from the bed. I wrapped myself in a sweater and followed the noise to the main hall. Doctor Renaud was already awake, speaking in low tones with a man I hadn't seen before. When he noticed me, he turned and smiled. "Ah, Miss West," he said. "Good morning. This is Mr. Keller. He's the Foundation's chief legal officer." The man extended his hand, polite but firm. "A pleasure, Miss West. I've been briefed on your situation. I believe it's time we discuss the practicalities of your inheritance." My inheritance. The word felt heavy in my mouth, like something both earned and undeserved. We moved to the study, the same room where I'd first signed the verification documents. A tray of coffee and croissants waited on the table untouched. Keller set down his leather briefcase and opened it with a click. Inside were neatly arranged folders, each labeled with a year and a location. Your grandfather established the Rosenberg Trust not as a single fund Keller began, but as a network 31 subsidiaries, each operating independently, tied together through the Foundation's central charter. They span maritime logistics, hospitality, and renewable energy sectors. The majority holdings, however, remain in international shipping, the industry he helped build with your father. I listened, trying to keep up as he outlined names and figures that sounded unreal. Geneva, Singapore, Dubai, a global empire my family had no idea existed. He did all this in secret, I asked finally. Keller nodded. For protection. He wanted to ensure that what he built would survive the mistakes of others. He trusted only the Foundation to manage it until the rightful heir appeared. Renaud's gaze met mine. That heir is you. I looked down at my hands. My father's going to lose everything when he finds out, isn't he? Renaud's tone softened. He already lost it long ago. He just doesn't know yet. I took a breath, steadying myself. Then tell me what comes next. Keller pushed a single document toward me. This is the final directive. It authorizes the Foundation to consolidate all accounts, assets, and intellectual property under your oversight. Once signed, you will be recognized as the legal owner and controlling beneficiary. The page shimmered faintly under the light, thick parchment, embossed with the Rosenberg crest. My name printed in bold at the bottom looked strange, like it belonged to someone else. Before I could speak, Keller added, "There's one more matter. Your grandfather left a clause, a sealed portfolio that could only be opened upon your personal approval." "What's in it?" he hesitated. "That's what we don't know. It's stored in the lower archives of the Foundation, accessible only with the master key. The gold key." I reached instinctively for the chain around my neck where I'd hung it hours earlier. Renaud smiled faintly. "He wanted you to decide when to open it, not before. The air between us was thick, with something unspoken." I set the document aside, staring at the chessboard near the window. The pieces were still arranged exactly as before, the queen standing alone, the rest unmoved. "Do you play Mr. Keller?" I asked suddenly. He blinked at the question. "A bit. Then you'll understand. Every piece matters, but sometimes the queen has to move first or the board stays frozen." He inclined his head. "A fitting metaphor, Miss West." Renaud watched me closely. "Are you ready to move then?" I signed the directive. The pen's nib scratched softly against the paper, the sound precise and final. Keller sealed the file with a wax stamp, pressing the Rosenberg crest into it. "It's done," he said. "From this moment, you are the sole owner of the foundation and all affiliated holdings. Congratulations, Miss West." I expected triumph, maybe relief, but instead I felt only stillness. The weight of what had just happened was too vast to process. My life had changed with the movement of a single pen stroke. Renaud poured me a glass of water. "You look pale." "I'm fine," I said, though my voice betrayed the tremor in my chest. "It's just a lot." "Power always is," he said gently. "But remember, it's not meant to be carried alone. Your grandfather built an entire institution to guide you. Trust it. And trust yourself." He handed me another envelope, smaller, cream-colored, sealed with the same red wax. "This arrived this morning," he said. "No return address, but it bears the foundation's internal code. I believe it's for you." I broke the seal carefully. Inside was a single line written in my grandfather's handwriting: "Go home, Clara." See what they built from my silence. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I met with Keller's assistants, reviewed summaries of the assets, and signed more papers than I could count. By evening I was exhausted, but my mind wouldn't stop spinning. Every signature was another thread tying me closer to a man who was no longer alive, but still orchestrating my every move. When I returned to my room, I stood by the window watching snowdrift across the lake. Somewhere out there my family was laughing, celebrating their inheritance, still unaware that the ground beneath them had already shifted. I packed my suitcase again, slower this time. The clothes felt heavier now, as if they belonged to someone more deliberate, someone who had stopped apologizing for existing. Renaud found me downstairs just before midnight. "Leaving already?" he asked. "I think that's what he wanted," he nodded, understanding. "The car will take you to the station at dawn. Your flight to Boston is confirmed." "But Clara," he hesitated, searching for the right words. "Be careful with how you play this next move. Power can illuminate or destroy depending on the light you hold it in." I managed a faint smile. "You sound like him." "That's because I believed in him," he said quietly, "just as he believed in you." When morning came, the sun broke through the clouds for the first time since I'd arrived. The snow glittered like glass. I stood at the top of the estate steps, suitcase beside me, breathing in the cold. The driver loaded my bag into the car. As I turned to look back, Renaud was standing by the door, one hand raised in farewell. "Do you know what you'll do when you get home?" he called. I tightened my grip on the gold key around my neck. "Yes," I said. "I'm going to see how far they've gone and how far I'm willing to go to bring the truth back." He smiled. "Then you've already begun." The car pulled away from the estate, the snow-covered road curving down toward the valley. In the rear-view mirror, the house grew smaller, framed by the mountains like something from a dream. As the distance swallowed it, I opened the envelope one more time. My grandfather's words seemed to glow in the morning light. "Go home. See what they built from my silence." The Queen had moved. Now it was time to face the board. The city looked different when I returned. Boston in winter had always been gray and familiar, but this time it felt smaller, like a stage I'd already outgrown. My cab pulled up in front of my parents' townhouse, a tall, perfect brick facade in Beacon Hill, every window glowing warm and false. I sat there for a moment, staring at the door I hadn't walked through in years, my reflection faint in the glass. Inside I could hear the echo of laughter. Of course they were entertaining. My family had a habit of celebrating before there was anything worth celebrating. I paid the driver, tightened my coat, and climbed the steps. The brass knocker was cold in my hand. The door opened before I touched it. My mother stood there, immaculate as ever, pearls at her neck, glass of wine in hand. "Clara," she said, her tone both surprised and disapproving. "You could have called. I wanted to see you," I said. "All of you." Her smile was small and sharp. "How? Spontaneous." "Come in then. We were just finishing dinner." The dining room was just as I remembered, crystal chandelier, polished silverware, conversation that dripped like honey over glass. My father looked up from the table, eyebrows lifting. "Clara," he said, feigning warmth. "Back so soon?" Victor leaned back in his chair, smirking. "What's the matter? Switzerland didn't live up to the fantasy," I smiled thinly. "Actually, it exceeded expectations." My father gestured toward an empty chair. "Sit then. You've come all this way." I sat, careful, composed. The smell of roast and expensive wine hung in the air. For a few moments we pretended to be a family again, passing dishes, exchanging pleasantries. But under it all, I could feel the tension tight, waiting to snap. My mother dabbed her lips with a napkin. "So tell us, dear, what was all that nonsense about an envelope and a plane ticket? I do hope you didn't get swept up in something foolish." "Depends on your definition of foolish," I said. "Grandfather thought it was important." My father chuckled. Arthur loved his riddles. "Don't tell me you flew halfway across the world for one of his games." I looked at him steady. "It wasn't a game." He tilted his head. "Then what was it?" I let the silence stretch, the kind that makes people uneasy. "Finally," I said, "a revelation." Victor snorted. "What, that you inherited a postcard collection?" I smiled. "Something like that." My mother sighed, reaching for her wine. "You really should learn not to chase ghosts, Clara. Your grandfather left you what he thought you deserved. That's all there is to it." Her words stung, but not in the way she intended. I'd expected them. This was their language, dismissal dressed as concern. I looked down at my plate, tracing the edge with my fork. "He left me more than you think." My father's laughter faltered. "What does that mean?" "It means," I said quietly, "he wasn't the man you thought he was. And he didn't leave you the company out of love. He left it because he needed time." He stared at me, eyes narrowing. "Time for what? To move everything I said, everything you believed was yours." The table went still. My mother's hand froze on her napkin. Victor leaned forward, smirk fading. My father's voice dropped. "Be careful with your words." "I am," I said. "You forged his signature, didn't you? The transfer of control, Hartman Maritime, the consolidation in 2004. You thought no one would ever find out." He rose from his chair, color draining from his face. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I've seen the documents," I said, standing too. "The emails, the bank transfers, the Cayman accounts in your name. I know what you did to him." My mother's voice trembled. "Where did you get those?" "From the Rosenberg Foundation," I said. "From the man he trusted when he stopped trusting you." Her face went white. My father's jaw tightened. "This is absurd. Those documents are fabrications." "Then why do they have your signature?" He slammed his hand against the table. The sound echoed like thunder. "You have no right to come into this house and accuse me of stealing from your own father," I interrupted. "Of betraying the man who built everything you have." The chandelier flickered slightly above us. My mother looked away, her perfect composure cracking. "You don't understand, my father," said his voice suddenly hoarse. He was old, confused. He didn't know what he was doing. "He knew exactly what he was doing," I said. "He built something you could never touch. And now it's mine." The silence that followed was absolute. Victor broke it with a scoff. "You're bluffing. You can barely balance a checkbook." I turned to him slowly. "Say that again." He opened his mouth, then stopped. Something in my expression must have reached him because his face changed, cocky amusement melting into uncertainty. My father sank back into his chair, his shoulders suddenly smaller. "You really think you can take it from us? The company, the estate, everything we've built, I don't have to take it," I said softly. "It was never yours." For a long moment no one moved. Then I picked up my coat. "I didn't come here to fight. I came to give you a chance to tell me the truth yourselves. You didn't. So now I'll let the truth speak for me." My mother's voice cracked for the first time. "What are you going to do, Clara?" I paused at the doorway. "Exactly what he taught me to do." "And what's that?" I looked over my shoulder, meeting her eyes. "Move when the board is silent." Outside, the night air hit me like glass. The streets glistened from the earlier rain, and the city hummed with the low rhythm of traffic. I walked without direction, the echo of my father's anger still pulsing in my ears. When I reached my car, I sat there for a long time, hands trembling on the steering wheel. I should have felt triumphant. I didn't. What I felt was something colder, resolve. I drove across the bridge, the skyline reflected in the water below. My phone buzzed beside me. A message from Renault. It begins tomorrow. Be ready. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. Then I drove on the city, falling behind me like a discarded piece on a board that no longer mattered. The next morning, I stood before the mirror in my apartment. My reflection looked unfamiliar, steady, unflinching. I pulled my hair back, fastened the gold key around my neck, and slipped the folded letter into my coat pocket. The Queen had returned to her side of the board. But this time, she wasn't waiting to be played. I checked my watch. In 3 hours, the first announcement from the Rosenberg Foundation would go public. The world would know the truth about the Hartman fortune, who owned it, who had betrayed it, and who was now reclaiming it. For the first time in years, I smiled, not out of joy, but certainty. It was time to begin the next move. The rain had not stopped since the night I confronted them. It came in sheets against the glass, blurring the city outside, washing the world clean in a way. I wished it could wash me. My apartment was lit only by the glow of my laptop screen, the blue light flickering across my face. The files Keller had sent from Geneva were spread across the table, scanned contracts, signatures, and financial statements that painted a portrait of betrayal in black ink and numbers. At the top of the folder was one labeled Hartman Consolidation Agreement, 2004. I clicked it open. The first page carried my grandfather's name in bold, followed by a signature that looked familiar but slightly wrong. The angle of the A was off the loop of the T, sharper than I remembered. And below it, my father's name, bold, precise, confident. The note at the bottom made my stomach twist. Transfer of controlling shares from Arthur Hartman to Richard Hartman. Verification complete. Verification complete. A lie signed and notarized. I scrolled through the pages, each one colder than the last. Emails between my father and members of the board. Phrases like execute before he regains capacity and will move the assets before he notices. They had stolen his company piece by piece, using his illness as a cover. My fingers tightened on the mouse until my knuckles went white. Behind me, thunder rolled. When I called, Geneva, Renault answered immediately. You found it then? He said quietly. Yes, I said. My voice didn't sound like mine. He was alive. He was lucid. They forged his signature. Renault exhaled long and heavy. We suspected as much, but we had no proof. Your access to the trust changes everything. The evidence is legitimate original scans from our archives. I swallowed hard. He knew, didn't he? My grandfather. He knew they took everything. He knew, Renaud said. But he also knew patience was the only weapon they wouldn't expect. I stared at the glowing screen, the rain tapping faster against the window. Patience, I murmured. He built his revenge 20 years before it was needed. Renaud's voice softened. He built a safeguard, Clara. Revenge was never his goal. But he trusted that if truth ever needed a voice, you would find it. I ended the call and sat in silence, staring at the documents. Each line, each signature, each number was a confession. My father had always talked about legacy, about the burden of building an empire, but he'd built his on theft. Then I saw another file near the bottom of the folder, offshore accounts, Zurich, Cayman. My pulse quickened as I opened it. The spreadsheet listed transactions spanning years, millions transferred from Hartman Employee Pension Fund into an account labeled Hartman Holdings Limited, under my brother Nathan's name. My breath caught. I scrolled further. Each transfer carried my father's authorization. They hadn't just betrayed my grandfather, they had stolen from their own employees. For a long time I couldn't move. My hands hovered above the keyboard, trembling. The rain outside sounded louder, like it was pounding straight into my chest. I thought of the people who worked for them, the men and women who'd given decades to the company, believing they were part of something honest. I thought of the way my father had smiled at company dinners, shaking hands with the same people he was quietly robbing. I closed the laptop, unable to look anymore. The silence that followed felt suffocating. Then I saw the small black flash drive Renaud had mentioned. It sat on the table beside the documents, marked only with a red wax seal. I plugged it in. A video window opened on the screen. My grandfather appeared sitting in an old armchair I recognized from his study. He looked older, thinner, but his eyes were sharp. "If you're watching this," he began, his voice low but steady, "then the board has turned." I froze. He took a slow breath. "They believe they've won. Let them. The truth doesn't rush, it waits. It watches. I've seen what my son has done, what he's willing to sacrifice for control. But control built on deceit always collapses under its own weight." He paused, his hands clasped together. "Clara, I know you'll find this someday. They will mock you as they mocked me. They will underestimate you. Let them." The Queen moves when the board is silent. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes seeming to look straight through the screen. "You are always the quiet one. That is your power. Don't waste it on anger. Use it for precision. Justice isn't loud. It doesn't need applause." The video ended. I sat there, staring at the frozen image of his face. My throat tightened, but the tears didn't come. What I felt wasn't grief, it was understanding. He had seen it all coming. Every betrayal, every lie. And he had left me the tools to fix it. When I finally stood, I felt steady in a way I hadn't in years. I went to the window, watching the lights flicker across the wet streets. The city looked washed clean, but underneath, I could see its reflection, the same as my family's legacy. Beautiful from a distance, rotten up close. The next morning, I took the train north, out of the city. The Rosenberg estate had sent for me, but I needed to see it again myself to understand the place where this story had truly begun. The snow had softened into rain by the time I arrived. The estate stood quiet, gray stone gleaming under the mist. Renaud met me at the door, his expression unreadable. "You've seen the truth," he said simply. "I have," I said, "and I know what I have to do." He studied me for a long moment. "This won't be easy. Your family will fight to keep what they believe is theirs." "I'm not fighting for revenge," I said. "I'm fighting for him, for what's right." He nodded slowly. "Then he was right to trust you." We walked together down the hall toward the study. The fire was already lit, its glow dancing across the portraits on the wall. My grandfather's eyes watched me from above the mantel, serene and knowing. Renaud opened a drawer in the desk and pulled out another envelope. "He left one final note for you to be read after the truth was revealed." My hands trembled as I opened it. "Clara, you will learn that power and goodness are not enemies. Do not let them make you choose between them. Your father confused greed with ambition. Don't make the same mistake. Use what I've left you to rebuild what they broke, not to destroy but to redeem." The words blurred as I read them, my chest tightening. Renaud's voice broke through the silence. He believed redemption was stronger than revenge. I think I said, my voice low, he wanted both. That night, I stayed in one of the guest rooms, unable to sleep. The rain had turned to snow again, falling gently against the windows. I sat by the fire with the gold key in my hand, running my thumb over its edges. The chessboard from the study rested on my lap, the queen standing tall in the center. I remembered every game we'd played, every quiet lesson hidden behind his calm eyes. Patience, observation, strategy. He'd been teaching me how to fight without hatred long before I ever knew why I'd need to. The flames flickered, casting long shadows across the walls. In that silence, I finally understood. This wasn't just about money or legacy. It was about truth, the kind that couldn't be buried forever. I whispered into the empty room, "I see you now, Grandpa. I see the board." The queen gleamed in the firelight, her reflection stretching across the table like a path forward. By morning, the snow had stopped. I stood at the window as dawn broke over the lake, the world pale and still. The air was sharp and clean, carrying a single promise. This was no longer about what had been taken from me. It was about what I was meant to reclaim. The Queen had moved again, and this time she was playing to end the game. The train from Geneva to Boston left before dawn. The windows were mirrors, reflecting a face I barely recognized, calm, certain, no longer waiting to be told who she was. The snow outside blurred into streaks of white as the train moved faster each mile, taking me closer to the confrontation that had been waiting my whole life. My grandfather had left me the truth, and now it was time to use it. I watched the reflection of my hand on the window, steady, not trembling. Around my wrist was the same gold key I had worn since Switzerland. It caught the faint morning light, a reminder of the power I hadn't asked for but now understood. Power was not about shouting. It was about moving quietly, choosing the moment no one saw coming. When I landed in Boston, the cold bit through my gloves, sharp and familiar. The city was the same, but I wasn't. I took a cab straight to the Rosenberg Foundation's American branch, an understated glass building tucked between banks downtown. Keller was waiting in the lobby. "Miss West," he greeted, his tone formal but warm. "Everything is ready. The documents have been filed in Geneva and cross-verified by both governments. You now hold controlling interest in all subsidiaries, including Hartman Maritime Group." The name hit me like a soft echo. My father's company, my family's empire, my inheritance. "Then it's official?" I asked. Keller nodded. "Entirely. The board will convene this afternoon to ratify the new ownership structure. You should be there." I smiled faintly. "Oh, I will be." When I left the building, the wind was biting but clear. The city shimmered under a thin crust of ice streets, glinting like veins of glass. I stopped at a cafe across from the harbor, ordering coffee I barely tasted. Through the window, I could see the outline of my father's headquarters, the tall steel tower bearing the Hartman name. For years, that building had felt untouchable, a monument to arrogance and deceit. Now it was mine. By the time I arrived at the tower, the sky had shifted from pale blue to the color of ash. The security guards at the front desk straightened when they saw me. One of them hesitated. "Miss West, we weren't told you had an appointment." "I don't," I said, "but I own the place." He blinked. "Excuse me." "Call your legal department," I said. "They'll confirm." A few minutes later, he handed me a visitor's badge with trembling fingers. "Right this way, ma'am." The elevator ride to the top floor felt endless. Each ding was a heartbeat. When the doors opened, I stepped into a room full of familiar faces, my father's board seated in rows around a long, polished table. At the head sat Richard Hartman, his expression calm and confident, until he looked up and saw me. "Clara," he said slowly, "what are you doing here?" I walked to the empty seat at the far end of the table and set down my bag. "Attending my first board meeting." There was a beat of silence, then murmurs around the room. My father's jaw tightened. "This isn't a game." "No," I said. "It's business." Keller entered behind me carrying a folder. He nodded once to me before distributing copies of the official ownership transfer. When he reached my father, the paper trembled slightly in his hand. "This is absurd," my father snapped. "You think a trust from Switzerland can override decades of corporate ownership? That's not how this works." Keller's voice was calm, almost gentle. "With respect, Mr. Hartman, it's exactly how it works. The Rosenberg Foundation has controlled the majority of shares in Hartman Maritime Group since 1998. Your daughter is now its sole beneficiary." My father's face drained of color. "You manipulated this," he hissed. "No," I said. "You did 20 years ago when you stole what wasn't yours. I'm just correcting the balance." The room went silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioner. The men and women who had once looked through me now stared at me differently, measured wary. My brother's voice broke the silence from across the table. "You can't run this company, Clara. You have no experience. You were a teacher, for God's sake." "I still am," I said. "I just learned new subjects, patience evidence and accountability." He rolled his eyes. You think you can just waltz in here and take control? I don't think I said. I already did. Keller placed the final file on the table, a signed verification from the Geneva courts and U.S. financial authorities. The company, its subsidiaries, and all registered assets now fell under my management. My father sank back in his chair, staring at the papers as if the letters might rearrange themselves into something more forgiving. "You've destroyed this family," he said quietly. "No," I said. "You did that when you chose greed over truth." He looked up sharply, anger flashing in his eyes. "You don't understand what it takes to build something to protect it. Everything I did was to keep us powerful. Power built on lies doesn't last," I said. "You taught me that." For a moment the mask slipped. He looked tired, older than I'd ever seen him. I stood gathering my papers. "You'll remain on the board for now. Your contracts, your salaries, your homes, they stay. But you answer to me." He stared at me as if I'd spoken another language. "You mean to humiliate me?" "No," I said softly. "To teach you what humility looks like." The meeting ended in silence. The board members filed out one by one, avoiding eye contact. My father sat there alone, staring at the table. I hesitated at the door. For a second, I saw him not as the man who'd betrayed my grandfather, but as the boy he must have once been, hungry, desperate to prove himself, terrified of being small. He didn't look up when I left. Outside, the snow had started again, light and slow. The harbor below was still ships rocking gently against the current. I walked to the edge of the pier, the cold biting at my cheeks. For the first time in years, the city felt quiet. When my phone rang, I didn't need to check the caller ID. "It's done," I said before Renaud could speak. "I know," he replied. "The foundation received confirmation an hour ago. You did it." I let out a long breath I hadn't realized I was holding. He built his empire on deception. I rebuilt it on silence. "That's exactly what he wanted," Renaud said. "Justice without blood." "Justice without applause," I corrected. He laughed softly. "Yes, that too." When the call ended, I stayed there watching the lights flicker across the water. My reflection shimmered faintly between the waves and the snow, two worlds colliding, one ending and another beginning. I took the gold key from my pocket and held it tightly in my palm. It was warm against my skin, as if alive. My grandfather's voice echoed in my memory. "The Queen wins by watching." I closed my eyes and whispered into the cold checkmate. The wind carried the word out over the harbor, scattering it across the sea like a secret only the water could keep. The board had turned. The game was over. And this time the Queen had moved to stay. The snow along the harbor had hardened into ice by the next morning, glittering under a sun too pale to warm anything. I watched it from the window of the Rosenberg Foundation's Boston office, my coffee going cold on the desk. Below, cranes moved silently over the shipping docks that once belonged to my father, their slow rhythm like breathing. Each one now operated under a new name, mine. The press release had gone out an hour ago. It was everywhere. Rosenberg Foundation acquires majority control of Hartman Maritime Group. The financial world was buzzing with speculation, questions, disbelief. For the first time, people were saying my name, not as an afterthought, but as the answer. When Keller walked into my office, he carried a folder thicker than any I'd seen before. "It's official," he said. "Alpine Holdings, our Geneva entity, completed the acquisition this morning. The media coverage is favorable so far. Investors are relieved, if anything. They think a new leadership structure might actually save the company." I nodded. "Good, let them think that." He smiled, slightly adjusting his glasses. "You sound just like Arthur." The comparison hit me like a small spark, both comforting and heavy. I gestured toward the chair across from me. "What's next?" "The board wants a press conference tomorrow," he said. "Your father's lawyers have already requested clarification on the new ownership structure, but there's nothing they can challenge. It's airtight." And Nathan Keller hesitated. "He's furious, but powerless." I stared out the window again. "Then it's working." He placed another document on the desk, one printed on ivory paper with embossed lettering. This, he said, is the final merger agreement. It consolidates all Rosenberg assets under Rosenberg Maritime Alliance, headquartered here in Boston. You'll be CEO, of course. The words barely registered. CEO. The girl who once counted grocery money for her family, now sitting in her grandfather's chair. I signed the document slowly, my hands steady, even though my heart wasn't. When Keller left, I remained there, staring at the signature. The ink was still wet, shining faintly in the morning light. It was done. The game was over. But games don't end, they transform. By noon, my inbox was overflowing. Congratulations from investors, inquiries from reporters, even messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years. Some were genuine, most were opportunistic. It was strange how quickly silence turned into noise once power shifted. The phone rang. I didn't need to check the caller ID. Clara, my father's voice said, clipped low. I assume you think this is clever. I assume you know it's legal, I replied. You humiliated me, he said. In front of the entire board, the press, our clients. You humiliated yourself, I said. I just let the light in. He was silent for a moment. Then softer, you could have come to me. We could have worked something out. You didn't have to make this public. I gave you that chance, I said. At the dinner, you lied. He exhaled slowly. You don't understand the damage you've done. This isn't revenge, it's suicide. The company, our family, won't survive this. The family doesn't deserve to, I said quietly. But the company will. I'll make sure of it. A pause, then his voice sharpened. You really think you can run this empire better than me, I don't think I said. I know. He didn't hang up. He just breathed for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, it was almost a whisper. You sound like him. Good, I said. That means I'm doing it right. When the line went dead, I sat there staring at the phone, realizing my hands were trembling, not with fear but with something colder, resolve. That evening, the Foundation's team arranged a private dinner at a waterfront hotel to celebrate the merger. I attended out of obligation, smiling politely at toasts and handshakes. People congratulated me as if I'd won a prize, not dismantled a legacy. Every compliment felt like an echo bouncing off hollow walls. At one point, Keller leaned over. You don't seem pleased. I'm tired, I said. Of what winning? He gave me a long look. Your grandfather used to say the same thing. He believed victory was the loneliest place in the world. I managed a faint smile. He was right. Later, I slipped out before dessert and walked down to the pier. The night was still, the harbor lights shimmering like distant stars. The cold bit at my face, but I didn't care. I needed air. The water below was black and endless. I thought of my grandfather standing on another dock decades ago, building something from nothing, believing it would outlast him. I thought of how easily my father had twisted that legacy into greed, how quietly I'd untwisted it back. It should have felt like justice. It didn't. It felt like quiet sorrow. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Renaud. The transfer is complete. The board in Geneva confirmed your position. Arthur would be proud. I typed a reply but deleted it before sending. Pride wasn't what I wanted. What I wanted was peace. The next morning, the city woke to headlines that changed everything. Hartman Maritime acquired by anonymous investor group. Sources confirm Rosenberg Foundation behind takeover. Mysterious heir reclaims family fortune. By noon, my name was no longer anonymous. I gave one statement to the press. Short, simple, deliberate. My grandfather built this company on integrity. My goal is to restore that integrity, not for profit, but for the people who trusted this name. The cameras flashed, reporters shouted, but I said nothing more. My silence carried more weight than any speech could. That night, I sat in my office overlooking the harbor again. The snow had stopped. The water was still. Across the bay, the Hartman Tower glowed with my family's name. But this time, it looked different, less like a monument, more like a reminder. Keller knocked gently on the door before entering. They're all asking what comes next, he said. Tell them the board will hear my full plan tomorrow, I said. He nodded but didn't move. And you, Clara? What comes next for you? I looked at the skyline reflected in the glass. I think I rebuild, I said. But not the way they did. He smiled. That's exactly what he hoped you'd say. When he left, I poured myself a glass of water and stood by the window. The city lights rippled across the bay, bending and shifting with the tide. Somewhere in that reflection, I saw myself not the girl who'd been cast aside, but the woman who had reclaimed what was hers. I whispered to the glass, to the dark, to the ghosts of the past. The board is mine now. The game is over. Then I turned off the lights, leaving the office bathed in the quiet glow of the harbor. Outside, the wind carried faint traces of snow again, soft and deliberate like applause meant for no one. And in that stillness I realized that victory didn't sound like triumph at all. It sounded like peace. The call came just after sunrise. I had been awake for hours watching the harbor from my window as light crept over the water. The city was still half asleep, its skyline softened by fog. My phone vibrated against the desk. When I saw the number, I knew it wasn't business. Clara, my mother's voice said, brittle and precise, as if she had rehearsed it. Your father isn't well. He collapsed this morning. My heart tightened. Is he? He's at Street Martin's, she interrupted. You should come. Her tone carried no warmth, no plea, only a quiet command, the same tone she used when telling me to smile during family photos. I hung up before I could say something I'd regret. For a long moment I sat in silence, the fog thickening outside the window, wrapping the world in gray. Then I grabbed my coat and went. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and fear. The walls were too white, the lights too bright. When I reached his room, I hesitated at the doorway. My father lay in the bed, pale and still, an oxygen tube hooked beneath his nose. My mother sat beside him, her posture perfect, her pearls gleaming even here. When she looked up, her eyes were dry. They say it was stress, she said. His heart can't take much more. I stepped closer, my voice low. Stress from losing the company or from losing control, her jaw tightened. You think this is funny, no, I said. But it's ironic. She rose slowly, the motion deliberate her anger, carefully dressed as dignity. I called you because he asked for you, not because I wanted you here. I glanced at my father. His eyes fluttered open, briefly unfocused. He looked smaller, somehow fragile, human. When he finally spoke, his voice was little more than a rasp. Clara. I moved closer, unsure what to feel. You've won, he said weakly. I hope it was worth it. I met his gaze. It wasn't about winning. It was about ending the lie. He gave a dry laugh that turned into a cough. You sound just like him. Grandpa. He nodded, his eyes distant. Always so certain the truth could save people. It doesn't. It only ruins them slower. For a moment I didn't answer. There was nothing to say. The truth had ruined us, yes, but it had also freed me. He turned his head slightly, studying me through the oxygen haze. You could still fix this, he whispered. Bring it back. Keep the name alive. The name will live, I said. But not the way you meant it. His eyes closed. You don't understand legacy, he murmured. You never did. Maybe not, I thought. But I understood integrity. When I left the hospital, the air outside was sharp and cold. The sky had cleared, the sun glinting off the wet pavement. Across the street, a reporter recognized me and started shouting questions, but I didn't answer. The world had enough words already. Back at the office, Keller was waiting. His expression softened when he saw my face. How is he alive? I said. For now. He hesitated. Do you want to postpone the board briefing? No, I said. We move forward. The conference room filled slowly that afternoon. The new board, composed of investors, legal advisors, and representatives from Rosenberg, waited in silence as I entered. I could feel their curiosity like heat. To them I was still a story, the forgotten heir turned CEO, the quiet teacher who'd inherited an empire. I took my seat at the head of the table. Thank you for being here, I said. We're restructuring. Effective immediately, Hartman Maritime will be absorbed into Rosenberg Global Holdings. Murmurs rippled through the room. Keller stood beside me, calm as ever. This merger ensures stability, he explained. No layoffs, no asset liquidations. We're protecting the core of what Arthur Hartman built without repeating his family's mistakes. One of the board members, a gray-haired man with a pinched face, cleared his throat. And who will serve as managing director under the new structure? I met his gaze. Richard Hartman. The room fell silent. Even Keller looked at me startled. He'll return, I continued, as a consultant, not an executive. His title will be honorary, his salary symbolic. It's not forgiveness, it's accountability. He'll help rebuild what he broke. Keller nodded slowly. That's unexpected. That's the point, I said. The press will see reform, not revenge. After the meeting, Keller followed me to my office. You didn't have to offer him anything, he said. I know. Then why? I looked out the window. The sun was sinking, painting the city in gold. Because Grandpa didn't teach me to burn people. He taught me to outplay them. He smiled faintly. You're becoming dangerous, Miss West. No, I said quietly. Just deliberate. That evening I drove to the hospital again. The halls were quieter now, the air heavy with the hum of machines. My father was awake, his eyes clearer this time. I heard he said, his voice rough, "You're keeping me on." As a consultant, I said. He studied me for a moment. You should have fired me, I know. A faint smile tugged at his lips. You're your grandfather's granddaughter. I'm my own person, I said. Finally. He nodded, closing his eyes. Then maybe there's hope for this family after all. I left before the nurses came in, the sound of the monitor fading behind me. Outside, the night air smelled of rain and metal. I stood by the car for a long moment, looking up at the hospital's glowing windows. Maybe he was right. Maybe hope was the one thing still worth inheriting. The next morning, the world reacted to the news. Hartman family restores leadership role under Rosenberg Foundation. New CEO extends olive branch to former patriarch. The headlines painted me as magnanimous, strategic, controlled. They didn't know the truth, that I wasn't extending kindness but boundaries. By noon, my mother called. Her voice trembled this time. I don't know what to say, she admitted. Say nothing, I said. Just mean it. A long pause. He's proud of you, you know. Even if he can't admit it. I don't need him to, I said. I just need him to learn. That night, I walked through the quiet corridors of the Rosenberg Tower. The office lights glowed dimly, reflecting off the glass walls. Everything felt still, suspended, like the city was holding its breath. I stopped by the conference room and turned off the last light. In the darkened reflection of the window, I saw the outline of my face, stronger, sharper, but calm. Behind it, the harbor shimmered endless and alive. On the desk lay the chessboard I'd brought from Switzerland. The missing pawn was still gone, the queen standing alone at the center. I reached out and moved her forward one square. It was time for the next game. As I locked the door behind me, I thought of my grandfather's words written in that final letter. Power doesn't shout, Clara. It whispers, and the world listens. Outside, the rain had started again, soft and steady. And this time I didn't walk away from it. I let it fall. The morning after the merger felt strangely quiet, like the world was pausing before deciding what came next. The newspapers had already labeled me the silent heir, their headlines mixing fascination with fear. To the public, I was a mystery. To my family, I was a reckoning they never saw coming. From my office on the top floor of Rosenberg Tower, I could see the city waking up, ships gliding into the harbor, steam rising from the streets, the lights sharp against the glass. It felt different now. The skyline that once made me feel small now looked like something I could shape with my own hands. Keller walked in carrying 2 cups of coffee, as if sensing my thoughts. They've confirmed the first shipment from Zurich, he said. Rosenberg Global is officially operational in both hemispheres. I took the coffee still warm. So it's real. He smiled faintly. It's been real for a long time, Clara. It just needed you to believe it. We sat in silence for a moment, watching the fog lift from the bay. You did what no one thought possible, he added. You reclaimed a legacy and built a new one without destroying the old completely. I set the cup down. Revenge destroys, strategy rebuilds. He nodded. Your grandfather would have approved. The mention of him sent a familiar ache through me, a soft tug between pride and longing. Sometimes I wonder, I said quietly. If he'd done it all differently, would any of us have learned anything? Keller's gaze was steady. He knew the cost of teaching through loss. That's why he chose you. By afternoon, the office was alive again with meetings and calls. I spent hours reviewing financial reports, finalizing contracts, redirecting funds to the new Rosenberg Foundation for Ethical Trade. Every decision felt like another move on the board, a quiet but deliberate shift towards something cleaner, fairer. At 4, my assistant buzzed the intercom. Your brother is here. For a second I froze. Nathan, yes. He said you asked him to report on his progress. I had almost forgotten. 2 months ago, I'd given him a job in operations under a different name, letting him start from the bottom without anyone knowing who he was. I told him, if he lasted 6 months, I'd consider bringing him higher. He stepped into my office now, looking older, sharper somehow. Gone was the careless arrogance, replaced by something closer to humility. His tie was crooked, his eyes tired. You wanted an update, he said. I nodded toward the chair across from me. How's it going? He laughed softly. It's strange actually doing the work instead of just signing for it. I never realized how much the employees carried. That's the point, I said. You were supposed to learn what it feels like to build something, not inherit it. He hesitated, then met my eyes. I know I can't fix what we did, but I'm trying, Clara. I really am. For the first time, I believed him. Then keep going, I said. And don't do it for me. Do it because you're tired of being like them. He nodded slowly, something shifting in his face, resolve maybe, or shame turning into growth. I'll prove it, he said. When he left, I stood by the window again, watching him disappear into the lobby below. It struck me how much had changed in just a few months. The family that once dismissed me was now orbiting around my choices. Power had rewritten gravity itself. That evening, I drove out to the estate. The air was crisp, the sky streaked with violet and gold. From the gate, the house looked peaceful again, the lights glowing against the snow, the garden still, the fountain frozen mid-splash. It no longer felt haunted. It felt reclaimed. Inside, the fire was already burning. My mother sat in the drawing room, her posture straight as ever, though something in her eyes had softened. You came, she said. You asked, I replied. She poured tea into 2 cups, her hands trembling slightly. Your father's home now. The doctors say he'll recover. That's good, I said. She studied me for a moment, her voice quieter when she spoke again. He still believes you hate him. I looked into my cup. I don't. Then what is this? She asked. All of it, the company, the trust, the control. It's correction, I said simply. Not punishment. She sighed, setting her cup down. You're stronger than I ever imagined. No, I said. I just stopped being quiet. We sat there for a long time, listening to the fire crackle. When she finally spoke again, her voice was fragile in a way I'd never heard before. He wanted to protect you, you know. He just didn't know how. None of us did. I met her eyes. Protection doesn't mean silence, Mother. Sometimes it means telling the truth even when it breaks everything. She looked away, nodding. I think I'm starting to understand that. Before I left, I stopped by my father's study. He was there, standing by the window, leaning on a cane. When he turned, he didn't look surprised to see me. Your mother said you'd come. I wanted to see for myself, I said. He gestured to the chair across from him. Sit. I owe you something. I didn't sit. You don't owe me anything. Maybe not, he said. But you deserve to hear this. I spent years trying to build an empire that could outlast my father's shadow, and when I couldn't, I convinced myself I was preserving him by stealing from him. I said nothing. He sighed, looking down at the chessboard on his desk. The pieces were still arranged mid-game, just as they had been the day he last saw Grandpa. He warned me once, my father continued. Said I'd lose everything if I stopped playing for the right reasons. Did you believe him? He shook his head. No, I thought I was smarter. Turns out he was just playing a longer game. Something in my chest loosened. Maybe now you can finish it. He smiled faintly. Not me. You. When I left the estate, the snow had started falling again. The headlights cut through the flurries as I drove down the winding road. In the distance, the city glowed faintly, my new board, my new world. That night, I sat alone in my office, the only light coming from the desk lamp. The gold key rested beside the chessboard, gleaming softly. I picked it up, tracing its edges with my thumb. There was a knock at the door. Keller stepped in, carrying a sealed envelope. This arrived from Geneva, he said. Marked private. I opened it carefully. Inside was a short letter written in elegant handwriting I didn't recognize. Miss West, it read, your grandfather's private vault at Rosenberg remains unopened. He requested it be accessed only when the company returned to its rightful owner. The key you hold will open it. My breath caught. Keller's eyes flickered to the key in my hand. Do you want me to arrange the trip? I nodded slowly. Yes, tomorrow. After he left, I turned the letter over. On the back, there was a single line, written in my grandfather's unmistakable hand. The end is never the end. Trust the silence once more. I stared at the words until they blurred the hum of the city soft behind the glass. The board wasn't finished. There was one last move waiting. As I turned off the light, I felt it, the quiet thrill of another game, beginning, not one built on vengeance or inheritance, but on legacy. Outside, the snow kept falling soft and endless, covering the world in white, as if erasing the old one completely. The jet descended through a veil of mist, the snowy ridges of the Swiss Alps glowing gold in the morning light. I pressed my palm against the window, watching the same landscape that had once terrified me. The first time I came here, I was a forgotten granddaughter chasing a riddle. Now I was returning as the heir of an empire and the keeper of its truth. The gold key hung on a chain around my neck. It caught the light, as if it remembered its purpose. The note from Geneva had been clear: the vault would open only when the company was restored to its rightful owner. That moment had come. When I landed, Adrian Keller and Renaud were waiting at the terminal. Keller's smile was small but proud. You've closed every circle, Miss West. Today you'll open the last one. The drive from Zurich to Geneva felt different this time. The mountains no longer loomed like judges. They stood like witnesses. We rode in silence until the car stopped before the Rosenberg Private Trust, its facade gleaming like carved ice. Inside, the air was cool and still. A security officer led us down a marble corridor, past glass doors and steel vaults, until we reached a chamber lined with dark stone. In the center, a brass plaque glinted under the dim light. Arthur Hartman, Confidential Holdings. Keller turned to me. It's yours to open. I stepped forward, the echo of my heels soft against the marble. My hand trembled only slightly as I fitted the key into the lock. For a second, I hesitated, remembering my grandfather's words. The queen wins by waiting. Then I turned it. The mechanism clicked, a low, resonant sound that filled the silence. The vault door eased open, releasing a breath of air that smelled faintly of cedar and paper. Inside, on a small pedestal, sat a wooden box and an envelope sealed in crimson wax. Renaud handed me gloves. Take your time, he said quietly. The envelope bore my name in his familiar handwriting. My throat tightened as I broke the seal. My dearest Clara, it began. If you are reading this, then the family name has returned to clean hands. The truth I hid is no longer a burden. It is a gift. I built Rosenberg not to hide from corruption, but to preserve the possibility of goodness. You are that possibility. I could not save my son from his hunger, nor your mother from her pride, but I knew you would find what they never sought: peace. My vision blurred. I kept reading. Forgive them, Clara. Not because they deserve it, but because you do. Power without forgiveness is just another cage. Let your strength be quieter than theirs, but never smaller. At the bottom beneath his signature, he'd written a single line: "The pawn returns when the game is won." Keller gestured toward the wooden box. I lifted the lid slowly. Inside, resting on black velvet, was the missing pawn from the chessboard he'd given me as a child, a small silver piece worn smooth at the edges. Beneath it lay another note, shorter this time. "Even the smallest piece can change the board." The tears came then, slow, steady, unashamed. Keller turned away, politely giving me space. When I finally looked up, my reflection in the steel door looked both older and lighter. "He always did like his metaphors," Keller said softly. "He always did," I whispered. But this was his last move. We left the vault in silence. Outside, the afternoon sun had melted the morning frost. The lake shimmered like glass, and for a moment I could almost hear him beside me, his calm voice reminding me to be patient, to see the whole board. That evening I stood on the balcony of the Geneva Hotel, overlooking the city where everything had begun. I pulled the letter from my pocket and read it again, the ink catching the light. His handwriting was still steady, still deliberate. It struck me that every lesson he had ever taught, every quiet moment we shared over chess or conversation, had led me here. I took the pawn from my pocket and held it up to the fading light. "Checkmate, Grandpa," I said softly, but not against them, against everything that tried to make me small. The next morning I flew home. 1 year later, the estate was alive again. The Foundation's first scholarship dinner filled the great hall with laughter and music. The chandeliers glowed, the tables shimmered with candles, and the guests weren't bankers or heirs, but students, engineers, ship workers, the people my grandfather's company had once overlooked. Nathan stood at the podium giving the opening speech. He looked confident, humble. When I started in the mailroom, he said, "I thought this was punishment, but it turned out to be a beginning. Tonight we celebrate not money but the power of second chances." The crowd applauded. From my seat at the side, I smiled. My father sat a few tables away, thinner now, quieter. He caught my eye and raised his glass slightly, a gesture of peace, not pride. My mother sat beside him, her hands clasped, her pearls gone. After the dinner, I walked to the entrance where a small display stood, a glass case holding the original chessboard. The missing pawn had been placed back where it belonged. The plaque beneath it read, "Even the smallest move changes everything." I traced the glass with my fingertips, remembering the weight of the pawn in my palm, the way my grandfather's eyes had gleamed when he said, "Trust the silence." The night was cold when I stepped outside. The air smelled like cedar and snow. The lake shimmered under the moonlight just as it had that first night in Switzerland. I took a deep breath and whispered to the sky, "It's over, Grandpa. You can rest now." A soft wind stirred the trees, and I could almost swear I heard his voice again, gentle, amused. "No, my dear, it's just beginning." For the first time I understood. The story hadn't been about revenge or even redemption. It had been about inheritance, the kind that couldn't be measured in money. Dignity, patience, kindness, the things no one could steal. When I returned inside, the guests were dancing. The music was light, the laughter real. The family I'd rebuilt from the ashes was no longer perfect, but it was honest. That was enough. Later that night, I stood on the balcony overlooking the city lights, the snow falling softly around me. I thought about everything. I'd learned how silence could be strength, how forgiveness could be power, and how sometimes the most important battles are the ones no one sees you fight. I smiled, lifting my glass toward the night. "To every queen who learned patience," I whispered, "and to every pawn who dared to move." The wind carried the words away, scattering them over the water like a blessing. And if you've listened this far, maybe this story spoke to you too. Maybe you've been underestimated, overlooked, or handed nothing but silence. If you have, I hope you know now, silence isn't emptiness. It's strategy. It's strength, waiting for its turn. So tell me, if you were in my place, what would your next move be? Leave a comment, share your story. Because somewhere, someone needs to know that even the smallest move can change the whole game. And if you believe in that, stay with me. There are more stories to tell, more games to win quietly. Because this is just the beginning.